In a moment, I'll introduce Margot Bennett, who is Executive Director of Women Against Gun Violence. I just want to share, though, that while we were talking, I realized, of course, we're all affected by gun violence in different ways, simply by turning on the news. You can't help but be affected. And I realized in our conversation that I have had two B'nai Mitzvah students whose B'nai Mitzvah I officiate that died by gun violence. It was very painful and difficult. So I'm thinking about Jaden and Zachary this afternoon. Margot Bennett has served the not-for-profit community as a board member of the Fair Housing Council, a founding director of the Alliance for Children's Rights, and as the associate executive director of the Inner City Law Center. After receiving her master's degree from the University of Judaism, AJU, she continued to pursue her not-for-profit career with the Western Law Center for Disability Rights and with the UJ before joining Women Against Gun Violence, where she has been now for over 10 years. I am especially grateful to Margot because she left her own shul to come spend the day with us. So would you please come share your thoughts with us? Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. And thank you for giving me and Women Against Gun Violence the opportunity to speak with you on this, the holiest of our days, about gun violence and gun violence prevention. Many of you know us already. We were founded almost 30 years ago, and since that time, the men and women of Women Against Gun Violence have worked tirelessly and fearlessly to prevent gun violence in our communities, state, and nation through both impactful legislation like background checks for all gun and ammunition sales and banning assault-style weapons and high-capacity magazines, and through our cutting-edge programs on safe gun storage, on voting, and on divestment. Our work has been and continues to be a model for communities across the United States. We hope you will be inspired today to join with us to make the change necessary to keep our children, our grandchildren, and all of us safe from the epidemic of gun violence that is sweeping our country. In the United States, almost 34,000 people have died so far this year by gun violence. Over 18,000 of those deaths have been suicide by gun. 1,000 of those deaths have been teenagers. 250 of those deaths have been young children. There have been 517 mass shootings so far this year and 523 murder-suicides. With such shocking statistics, you might ask, why don't we give up? We don't give up because there is action and change. Governmental budgets, including the federal budget, are including funding for neighborhood intervention programs. And just this past July, the House of Representatives passed a new ban on assault weapons. That bill is currently waiting for a vote in the Senate. In California, the legislature has passed and the governor has signed AB 452, which requires schools to send home an annual notice to student households on safe gun storage. The governor has signed into law a ban on the sale and possession of untraceable ghost guns and ghost gun kits. AB 1594, and this one's one of my favorites, allows victims of gun violence to sue the gun industry for negligent or reckless conduct that led to their injuries. And that's notwithstanding the federal protections that have existed for years that have insulated the gun industry from any accountability. And then AB 58 that requires suicide prevention training for staff in all California schools. So we continue with our work, and there is a role for you to play. Faith communities represent an enormous, untapped resource in the work of preventing gun violence. Millions of people in this country gather each week in synagogues, churches, mosques, and other places of worship. Just imagine if all these millions of people across our nation could be engaged in preventing the epidemic of gun violence. Just imagine how gun violence could be prevented if the 1,000 member families of Temple Israel of Hollywood were engaged in preventing gun violence. Faith communities too often are hesitant to engage in gun violence prevention, seeing this as too political or too controversial. This is in part because gun violence prevention has been talked about with the false dichotomy of pro-gun, anti-gun, which has led to polarization rather than finding common ground. There are even sometimes suggestions that the faith community should hold a debate about whether they should engage in gun violence prevention. There may be differences about approaches to gun violence prevention, but about the fact that this could be and should be a priority for communities of faith, there is no debate. All faith traditions share in common the foundational belief that each human being is created in the image of God, that each human life is sacred. To quote Rabbi Jill Jacobs in the Rabbis Against Gun Violence anthology, the core Jewish teaching about humanity is that every human being is created in the image of God. And there is also our foundational core Jewish value, tikkun olam. The most modern and broadly understood notion of tikkun olam is that of repairing the world through human action, through our action. Our shared responsibility to change, to improve and fix our earthly surroundings is powerful. The sacred in human life is destroyed every day by gun violence, with families, loved ones, and communities devastated as a result. There are faith communities that may want to be engaged in this work and don't quite know where to begin or what involvement looks like. And there are individuals who may also be hesitant. Our sacred texts tell us about people who God called and who were hesitant: Moses, Jeremiah, and especially Jonah, who not only left the city, but the country. God called to all these hesitant people, as God calls us. I would like to share a few thoughts about how you as individuals can approach this life-saving work. Here are two manageable tasks for you to consider. Make sure firearms are stored safely and securely in a locked safe and unloaded with ammunition stored separately. Caring for our young children and teens includes making sure that our children visit and live in homes where, if there is a gun, it is securely stored. As individuals, we have an obligation to ask if guns in the home are locked up safely and securely, and that includes asking friends, neighbors, and yes, even our families. Unintentional shootings have taken 250 young lives so far this year. There have been over 27 school shootings so far this year. Around 74% of the firearms used in school shootings were obtained from the student's home or from that of a friend or relative. Locking up your guns and making sure others lock up their guns can help prevent this type of tragedy. And of course, among the most tragic suicides are those by young people. Too often, teens use their parents' guns. A study of firearm suicides among teens ages 17 and under found that 82% used a firearm belonging to a family member, usually a parent. When storage status was known, about 2/3 of the firearms had been stored unlocked. Among the remaining cases where the firearms had been locked up, the teen knew the combination to the safe or where the key was kept. So I say to you, real safe storage can save teen lives. And 2, we can defund the gun industry right now, and we can do that as individuals and as a congregation. We can take a look at where we bank, where we invest, and where we shop. We must align our banking, investing, and spending with our values. Tikkun Olam. The information table outside the sanctuary has a postcard that will direct you to our website, divestforourlives.org. The website provides concise information on divesting, as well as links to sites with more detailed and specific information. Historically, we can see that divestment has worked. In South Africa, helping to end apartheid, and in the United States, where fossil fuel divestment campaigns began in 2011 across college campuses and have resulted in, as of October 2021, a reported total of almost 1,500 institutions committed to divesting their funds from fossil fuels. That amounts to an estimated total of over $39 trillion in assets being divested. We can and must do that to the gun industry. I now want to return to our sacred text, where God over and over again holds the vision of how we should all live together. The prophet spoke to the people of Israel so many years ago and speak to us still. In the book of Micah, each person sits under their own vine and under their own fig tree, and no one will make them afraid. In Zechariah, old men and women will sit again in the squares of Jerusalem, every one of them staff in hand because of their great age, and the squares of the city will be full of boys and girls playing in the squares. And in Isaiah, God says to the people of Israel, I have called you by name. You are mine. Children of Sandy Hook, I have called you by name. You are mine. Children of Uvalde, I have called you by name. You are mine. Congregants of Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, I have called you by name. You are mine. Let us honor their lives, all of the lives lost, with our action. Hatima Tova.